Sexual relationships can distort your thinking. And I'm talking to those of you who grew up neglected and abandoned in childhood. When you get sexually involved with someone, even if they're good, I'm talking about the early stages here, there's a big risk that your red flag detector completely shuts down. And very quickly, if they turn out to be harmful people, toxic for you, you will begin to accept any amount of mistreatment, but you'll blame yourself. So do not get yourself stuck in a relationship with someone who is cruel or dismissive or controlling, and definitely not abusive, because your attachment wound that got you quickly into this relationship almost always goes hand in hand with an abandonment wound that makes your logic around leaving, getting away from mistreatment sound impossible to do. And it'll make it seem like it's worth any amount of suffering in that bad relationship just to avoid the pain. Now, I want you to hear me. When you go into this distorted thinking, this is your trauma talking. My letter today is from a woman I'll call Lola, and she writes, "Dear Anna, I'm a 58-year-old woman with CPTSD. I'm recently divorced after 20 years of marriage, and I'm still close to my ex-husband, which is good because we have a teenage daughter." All right, I've got my fairy pencil here. I'm going to circle things I want to come back to for a second reading on Lola's letter, but let's see what's going on in her life first. All right, she says, "I also have Crohn's disease, which I spend most of my existence taking care of. The CPTSD comes from being abandoned by my mother when I was a 3-year-old child. I was raised by my grandmother and my father. Where am I today? Becoming disabled with Crohn's has made life challenging for me. But the biggest problem I have is with blaming myself for everything, even if I probably shouldn't. Relationships seem to be the most difficult aspect of my life. Limerence for the person I'm about to tell you about was strong. 2 years ago, I found the man of my dreams. He was my first boyfriend, and then 45 years later, I still carried a torch for him. He was a wealthy engineer and was insanely talented with almost anything he did. As we grew up, we lost touch with each other till Facebook came along, in which we kept a very light contact. Then his wife of 30 years died from breast cancer, and 6 weeks after her death, he began pursuing me. The love bombing was heavy, and I was all over it. I divorced my husband, and against my better judgment, I let the pursuing take place. The next thing I know, he bought a house for me and my daughter to live in, but it was 3.5 hours from her father's house, and visitation was going to be a treacherous job. Finally, my daughter and her father were going to take me to court so she could stay in the small town we were living in so that she could finish school there. Naturally, I wanted to let her stay there, but then I wouldn't have much a part in her life, and I wasn't willing to choose the boyfriend over my child. So I left the house and came back to where I lived before. Only now, the relationship is over. I was so devastated because I was obsessed with trying to make the relationship work. But too many odds were against it. His children weren't ready to accept me, and my child didn't accept him. The last day I saw this man, we were on a ski trip. I became very sick with altitude sickness and could barely function. My partner became annoyed and eventually angry with me for spoiling his fun and picked a drunken fight with me. It spun out of control, and I made up my mind to do something I really regretted. I packed my stuff and left him in Colorado while I drove home. And she explains that they had taken her car together up to the ski resort. This was a little over a year ago. Last week, I was told he had just gotten married again. I'm in a state of shock and severe sadness. Was I wrong to leave him behind in Colorado? Was I wrong to think the relationship was going nowhere? I had a problem with how much drinking he did and how much he likes to control people. On the other hand, he was wealthy and very talented and thought I was crazy for thinking he drinks too much. Because of my Crohn's disease and alcohol playing a huge part in the failure of my marriage, I was hyper-focused on his drinking. I kept wanting to accommodate his schedule while I never asked much of him. The reason I'm in such turmoil is because in no time flat, he replaced me and suddenly married someone else. I'm so anxious and upset, I can barely stand it. Was I wrong for leaving him behind? How do I forgive myself for my part of the breakup? I need some good fairy healing. Thank you and take care, Lola. All right, Lola. Here comes your good fairy healing. It's going to be tough love, but I think this is going to be good for you because, like you said, you tend to blame yourself for things. And a lot of us who are traumatized as kids, we blame ourselves instead of taking responsibility for things that we have power over and that we could have done differently. We end up blaming ourselves for other people's bad behavior. And I feel like you might be doing a bit of that here. So I'm going to help you see what you could have changed and can change in the future and what's totally not your fault. And I've definitely got an opinion about this one. You had a 20-year marriage, you have a teenage daughter, you have Crohn's disease, and it's a lot of work to care for yourself. I hear you. All right. You lost your mom. You didn't lose her. She took off. She abandoned you when you were 3 years old. I can hardly think of anything more devastating. That's terrible. And you were raised by your grandmother and father. So you're sitting there with a huge abandonment wound. And you left your marriage. You know, by the way, leaving a marriage when you're a person with an abandonment wound, even if it was the right thing to do, it can be so destabilizing that we make weird choices. But that's not quite the order things went in. So let's see. So the biggest problem you have is with blaming myself for everything, even if I probably shouldn't. Yeah, that's what traumatized people do because we're confused. We know somebody's at fault, but there's this weird way that when we blame ourselves, it's a way of taking control of the situation rather than facing that somebody doesn't care about us. And sometimes we need to also think we have trouble facing where we did something that was hurtful to other people. So all of that, the mix of those things is very normal when we find ourselves in a difficult life thing like you're in right now. All right. So then you said relationships are the most difficult aspect. Join the club, my sister. And limerence for the person I'm about to tell you about was strong. So 2 years ago, I found the man of my dreams. I'll tell you what, whenever people say the man or woman of my dreams, nowadays I'm always skeptical because all people are people. And the people of our dreams are perfect and frictionless, and we're never afraid and we're never resentful at them and we never feel jealous. So the people of our dreams are just sort of there to torture us and compare favorably to actual people who could possibly love us. So anyway, that's my commentary on that phrase. I found the man of my dreams. Or so you thought, right? He was my first boyfriend, and 45 years later, I still carried a torch for him. He was a wealthy engineer and was insanely talented with almost anything he did. As we grew up, we lost touch with each other till Facebook came along, in which we kept in very light contact. Then his wife of 30 years died from breast cancer, and 6 weeks after her death, he began pursuing me. Okay, huge red flag. Now, it's not uncommon that somebody who's in deep grief would do something crazy and impulsive like get into a new relationship and try to make it a replacement for this person they've lost after 30 years. And I totally understand that. And on the one hand, I give it a pass. But the thing is, I don't, because you can really hurt another person with that behavior. In an unfortunate combination of flaws here, you also just completely went for it. And you say the love bombing was strong and you blame yourself for allowing him to pursue you. So you could have shut it down. I'm going to suggest to you, as you work on healing this, that you allow that to be a little bit more of a stronger self-reflection than you passively allowed someone to do this bad thing. And, just sort of work with the idea that you met him right there. You were ready to run away from your life too. Okay. And you're not the first person like us who did that, but it really helps when you can just kind of look at how did this happen? It will help you not to feel like such a hapless victim of other people's coming and going, and sort of see that for you, it had something, even when part of you had to have seen this was impulsive of him. It was ill-advised of him. When you left your marriage for somebody like this, you were being impulsive and doing ill-advised things too. So in a way, you were well matched, right? You could both go into this fantasy relationship and the fantasy that it could work out like this. We'll talk about the fact that he got married later, which we're not really qualified to diagnose. But the one thing that relationship has the advantage of is he has a little more time out of bereavement to have formed that one. Well, also, let's just cut to the chase. We feel sorry for the woman he married because I can really hear in your letters that he's got some big issues that make him a very difficult person to be with. I'm not sure there's anything you could have done to make this a good relationship, even if magically he had been as screwed up as we can see that he is, and you were perfect in every way. But I don't think it's, our egos often perceive like, I was perfect in every way. How could this happen? But there's usually a story where it's like, well, there was a way that we were kind of well matched. So I divorced my husband against my better judgment. Now, you said later in the letter that the marriage ended because of drinking problems. So it sounds like you were not happy, presumably because of his drinking, but it was against your better judgment just to divorce. And the next thing you know, this new guy bought a house for you. So buying a house for somebody is a very flashy thing to do, perhaps a very manipulative thing to do, especially because it was just some idea he had of wanting you near him, not with him, not living with him, which is good. I'm glad you didn't live with him. But when people buy a house so that you're near them, but, in a different house, so there's, I don't know, and taking you away from where you could co-parent your daughter. This is not someone who knows you, loves you, and cares about your best interest, all right? This is somebody just like moving you like a pawn to a place that suits what they want from you. So I'm done giving him a pass for being bereaved. This is now crossing over into weird controlling behavior. And then you and your daughter moved there, but your daughter didn't want to be there. She didn't want you to be with this guy, which is it's not uncommon when people are just out of a relationship. The kids are not going to accept the new person. And I know that sometimes very immature adult kids don't accept anything anyway, but that's not the case here. Your daughter's a kid. She got taken away from her father. You were carrying on with this guy who clearly didn't care about the kid's best interest. And of course she didn't like it. Her red flag detector still works. That's what's going on here. So finally, they were going to take you to court so that she could stay in the small town where we were living and she could finish school and keep a relationship with her dad, of course. Very, very important. To a teenage girl, that is so important to have a dad there. That affects so many things about her development and her sense of herself and the relationships that she's going to have. So I'm so glad. Naturally, I wanted to let her stay there, but then I wouldn't have had much part of her life, and I wasn't willing to choose the boyfriend over my child. Okay, big win there. I'm so glad you chose right there. That would have been terrible. It would have been like your mom leaving all over again, wouldn't it? For you to do that. It's not comparable. I understand that, but still, it would have been terrible. So the boyfriend, it sounds like at most you were with him a year or something. So I left the house and came back to where I lived before, only now the relationship is over. So I can hear you, you're second guessing yourself and thinking, well, if I hadn't stood up and done what was best for my daughter, then he might still be with me. That's how our trauma brain and abandonment brain thinks. I should have really thrown more away from my life so that I would be acceptable to them. And then our mind makes that leap and goes, and then I would be happy and have a great relationship. But there is no happiness and great relationship with somebody who isn't thinking of your best interest. Even what friendship is, let alone romantic love is, we care very much about what's best for the other person. We become invested in that. We would make changes in our own lives so that it would be good for them. That's what love is. That's what love or friendship is. And that's what a romantic relationship needs to be, is both love and friendship, right? So I was so devastated because I was obsessed with trying to make the relationship work. So if you're a year into a relationship and you have to be obsessed with making it work, what it suggests is it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And then what does a person abandoned in childhood do? We crap fit. We're just like, here, I'll change everything about my life. I'll stop needing anything. I'll pretend I'm the person I think you want me to be. God bless our little selves who do that, who are still carrying that idea. I can imagine how as a 3-year-old that on some level you were thinking, if I just hadn't been such a pain in the butt for my mom, maybe she wouldn't be gone. So get rid of that idea. When people love you, they stay. When people love you, you don't have to change yourself to be with them. Now, that said, most of us have some problems. So you talk about like your ex-husband and this guy both using alcohol in a way that resulted in something quite unhappy for you. So it's not that they, you can ask them to change stuff like that, but when they don't, they're not a good person to be with. These are the tragedies of relationships, that people do come with problems, and we're always in a position of trying to decide, can we handle the problems they come with? Do we actually accept them? Or does it cost us too much to do so? That's why relationships are hard, and that's why we date. We don't jump in and get into big commitments with people at first, because we need to get to know them. We need to find out, like, are there red flags? Are there things that they want in their life that I can't possibly fit with without sacrificing something terribly important to myself? Do I really think that they're right for me, or am I just lonely right now? Or am I just trying to find a way out of my marriage that I didn't like? Or am I just, just having a trauma-driven thing right now where a new romance comes in? I mean, new romance, there's like nothing better to sort of go, look, your whole life could be great. It could be different in a flash. Somebody finally realizes, that you're great and you deserve better. And it's so easy for those of us neglected in childhood to sort of run with that rather than to time test it, road test it. Let's just see. Let's give it a little time. Let's see how that bears out. And I think people who weren't traumatized are pretty good at that process of discernment. Those of us who were abandoned, neglected, not so good. We're not so good at it. Usually it takes us extra time and it takes us some support, which is why it's very good you wrote in, because this is you getting support for something that's hard for you, which is just smart and sane and self-loving to do. Okay. His children weren't ready to accept you. No, of course not. Their mom just died. I remember when my stepdad, it was years after my mom died. And when my siblings and me, we were all home for Christmas or something, and we found out he had been dating somebody. And we all said, oh, well, that's good. We were saying what you're supposed to say, that's good, but we were shocked and devastated. And I was the one who started crying. And I was happy for him on the one hand, but it's very hard to accept. It meant that my mom was really gone. Like what does it take for him to date somebody other than my mom? Yeah. So your child didn't accept him. And that's a big thing. Now, I know that it's possible for children to be unreasonable and not accept somebody. But the thing about children is their red flag detector is still working and it doesn't feel good to them. Of course, your daughter didn't like you getting divorced. Children naturally want to keep the family together. They naturally want that. And it's devastating for them to have it end. And it feels very, like a betrayal when the parent goes off with somebody else. So that this type of change where you get together with somebody new, it's not that you could have never had that in your life as leave your marriage and be with somebody new, but it takes a huge cooling off period and a huge adjustment period for both of you to be able to process what happened and not to have to leave a marriage for somebody you didn't really know. I can just imagine, you don't mention your ex-husband, but I assume this had to be devastating for him. And you implied that he had a drinking problem here, but that doesn't mean it wasn't devastating for him. So it was a lot for people to deal with. All of a sudden, very fast. And when things are done impulsively like this and running off with somebody else, yeah, people feel betrayed. I know you had your reasons, but yeah, that's what they're dealing with. So I encourage you when you go into your healing to really allow yourself to feel the pain of having hurt people with this, even though you had your reasons, but allow yourself to feel that, because as you can get honest with yourself about that, you can, so long as, if we ever have like rocks, we're not going to turn over and go, oh gosh, I hurt people. If we can't look at that, it's going to hold back our healing. There comes a time when we're going to need to just sort of do the reckoning and go, all right, I did this. These were my reasons. This is what was ill-advised about it. This is what I was hoping for. This is what I wish I had done more research on. Here's where I hurt people. And when you can be very honest and realistic about the hurt caused, you can begin to apologize and repair your relationships. Now, I'm not expecting you to repair your first marriage after what's happened. It doesn't sound like that would happen. But you have a cooperative co-parenting relationship, and I'm very proud of you for that. That's so good for your daughter. And when you can acknowledge the betrayal, it's possible, even when you have to leave a marriage, it's possible not to betray. My first marriage ended. My kid's dad, he's the one who left. I think I wanted to leave, but I didn't feel like it was possible yet because the kids were so small. So I was scared when he announced he was leaving, but I knew the rightness of it. And I was scared and I was angry and I was hurt and I had all the feelings about it, but there was a rightness to it. And so it did feel like a betrayal, but not the level of betrayal it could have been had he run off, had he left me for somebody else. So that's just a hard pill to swallow for everybody. And when you can feel the sadness about that, you're going to be in a position to have a proper talk about this where you repair the friendship you now have with your ex and the relationship you have with your daughter. She's probably too young to hear the deep drama of it all, but kids can sense. They can sense when you're being honest and when you're kind of just like pulling the wool over their eyes. And it's pretty hard. I know because, I've made some like dumb decisions when I was a mom, when I was a single mom. And I know how tempting it is, or it's confusing about how do you protect the kids from ugly truths? And then how do you, at the same time, not bullshit them? Because kids have a detector, they know. And if they know you're bullshitting, they can't trust you. So that's a hard line. This is like sometimes where a therapist can be really helpful to help determine, like, how do you talk about this with a child who you don't want to lay the whole thing out? It's like, well, your father was just a terrible drunk and I was sick and tired of, I felt emotionally abandoned and blah, blah, blah. They don't need that whole story. So it's difficult to acknowledge the truth without telling them all the dirt. But that's the job. That's the job, is to sort of acknowledge that, this happened and I made a bad decision when I went with this guy, and I'm sorry that I put you through that, but I'm committed now to taking care of you, and I'm not going to let that happen again. And I hope you can forgive me. That's like how you can talk to a teenage child about what happened without bringing them into the whole drama or trying to recruit them as your special buddy, as some parents do. So I'm not saying you did that, but, it happens. It's tempting to do as a single mom. It's when the boys were mad at me, it's like, why'd you leave daddy? And it's like, I didn't leave. And I want to tell them, no, he left. I always had to come up with a story that felt true enough, but didn't throw their dad under the bus. So you do get to throw this new guy under the bus, though. It's okay. You don't have to protect his reputation with your daughter, just so you know. It's just her dad. It's her dad, which is her dad, and you are her primary relationships. And so that's very important. So you had been obsessed. The kids didn't accept either of you. The last day you saw the man, you were on a ski trip, and you got very sick with altitude sickness and could barely function. My partner became annoyed and eventually angry with me for spoiling his fun and picked a drunken fight with me. And it spun out of control, and I made up my mind to do something I really regretted. All right. Let's unpack this a little bit, because I can just sort of imagine this scenario. If I give him the benefit of the doubt, I know that he's made an impulsive decision to get into a relationship with you. And I know that you've done the same, and that both of you on some level are going to be desiring to get out of this terrible situation that you've got yourself in where nobody approves of it. People are hurt by what you're doing. You're beginning to see the signs that it's not a match. It's not going to work. I know that feeling from both of your points of view. And I think there's a time when we can't face the mistakes we've made as easily as we can face the mistakes the other person has made. And so on the one hand, I feel like, what? He got drunk and he was emotionally abusive with you? Because I've had altitude sickness, by the way. You really can't function. It's like throwing up and your head throbs so much you can't stand up. And it is totally incapacitating. And to have somebody like threaten your relationship because you won't get up and have fun with them I would say is emotional abuse. But I'm also trying to, just sometimes I just try to imagine, I don't know, what would his side of the story be? And I don't know what it would be. I don't know him, and he didn't write to me. But I know that when I've made an ill-considered decision to get into a relationship and be at some place with somebody where you already know, like, oh God, this isn't going to work, there's part of you that's kind of looking for the crack in the thing, that feels like lashing out, that can't take responsibility yet for the mistake, that we ourselves make, but it's just lashing out and like, look what you've done. You've made this not fun. He's sitting there in grief and bereavement about his wife. And instead of dealing with that, he's like, come on, make this ski trip fun. Why can't you? And the sadness is creeping up on him, and the remorse and the shame. It's all creeping up on him. And he's like grasping at straws to try to make it stop. Am I misreading that? I don't know. That could be what it is. But also he was emotionally abusive. But you got him back with a little emotional abuse yourself of just taking off with the car. Now, here's the thing. At the point where he picked a drunken fight with you and he was being that way, I'm so glad that you took action and you got out of there. You didn't do it in the perfect, caring, elegant way, maybe, but that's kind of how it has to be sometimes. the attachment wound and the abandonment wound are so strong that sometimes you just see your opening and you know on some level you're just going to have to get out right now, and it's going to be sloppy and it's going to inconvenience him quite a bit, and it's rough and it's going to go down in history as a bad move, but so what? You had to get out of there. Your spirit couldn't take it anymore. You had to go. And in fact, this did end the deal. So you did it. So I know that you're having second thoughts now. You're like, somebody else married him. Now they're in happy land. Mark my words, Lola. They're having the same sorts of problems that you had with him. I'm happy for you not to have those problems right now. Your marriage ended. You have a teenage daughter. All hands on deck with Lola's universe here, inner world here. It's time to have a good life. It's time for you to heal the wounds that had you in the situation that you were in, and to really, really focus on having a good relationship with your daughter and setting her up to be loved and successful in her life. And that is a big job. And I don't know, you didn't say whether you have a career, but if you do, like, that's a lot of job, that's like 2 jobs at the same time. And I'm happy for you to be single right now and not in a lot of drama, not trying to abandon yourself to make it work or obsessing on anything. When you get loved again, Lola, what I would want for you is for somebody to just they get who you are. They know that you have Crohn's disease. They know that you have down days because of that or complications. They know that you have a daughter. And if your daughter's still living at home at that time, they know that she's part of the package, and they don't get to be in your life unless they're good for both of you. And good for both of you means slowly coming into your life so that both of you have time to get to know who that person is and whether being closer to them is the right thing for you. When we rush into a relationship, we end up with that ski resort scene of just I hate you, drive off. Oh, driving off. It is a beautiful moment sometimes in personal freedom. And I totally know about the remorse that comes afterwards. And I also know how your trauma is telling you that if you had just abandoned yourself a little more completely, you'd still be with him and it could work. But I think it sounds like something where no matter what you had done, it wasn't going to work. It was ill-timed. It was ill-conceived. It was ill-formed. It was formed from loss and divorce and impulsiveness. And I know that there may have been great love and excitement there, but it's not the only love and excitement that's available in the world. The fact that he couldn't treat you as a whole package, and that thing where he bought you a house near him but away from your daughter, I think that's the number one red flag. That and drunkenly picking on you for not being able to keep his evening fun. It doesn't show great maturity. If you had stayed with him, you might have had to deal with that every time your Crohn's was acting up. And of course, the more stressed you got about his behavior and the threat that the relationship was going to fall apart, the more it would exacerbate the Crohn's, right? You don't need a lot of stress. You need love and steadiness and comfort and somebody who gets you and somebody who really likes you as you are. And there's no self-abandonment needed. But it really takes time for 2 lives, especially once you're in your 40s, to forge a life with somebody. It really takes time. It's difficult to knit 2 lives together at that age. You get very, you have your requirements and you have your preferences on both sides. So just let time be your friend. Let yourself heal. Relish this time with your daughter. I know everybody says this, but she'll be gone soon. And it really is a special thing and a special opportunity to make a difference in her life that you will never regret being present for her right now. And I'm so glad that both you and her dad are in her life right now doing that. So you're second guessing yourself. And I want you to just take my word for it. That's what we do. Being hyper-focused on somebody's drinking, I want to give you permission to do that. If you're not comfortable with people who get drunk, why don't you put that as one of the top things when you make a list, which I'm going to suggest you do, is make a list of what you really need in a relationship. So first, it's so important that you notice that how many of the signs of trauma are showing up in the way you do relationships now. If you want to see my list of that, it's a quiz. It's a quiz that just lists, these are the signs that early trauma has affected your relationships. You can just see how many of these do I resonate with and reflect on those. It's a free download I have. I'll put it in the top link in the description section below this video. Anybody, if you're watching this, you can have it too. And it's the signs that past trauma is affecting your relationships now. These are very good things to acknowledge and notice in yourself. It sets you on a path to be like, okay, you'll find your mind will open quite a bit to the possibility for change and healing in your life once you can even recognize these. So you can look at those. And then there's a time for healing between major relationships, a time for healing. So what happened in your last marriage and where you are right now and the disaster of your first go with dating somebody, this is not an empty time in your life. This is a time of great healing and richness and possibility. I encourage you to embrace this time, to let it be slow, to allow some time to pass, to not worry so much about meeting somebody. I know how that pressure comes and gets you sometimes, but what a person needs always is friends. Whether you're in a relationship or out of a relationship, you need friends. So that's something that deserves to be a priority in your life. And you didn't say what your friend life was like, but usually in situations like this, it's harder for this kind of high drama, impulsive decision to happen for a person who is well-friended. Because friends are going to say something. Friends are going to help keep you in reality and ground you and help you get out of there without the high drama. And so friends are a blessing. So do what you can to have friends in your life. I have this dating course, and the link to it, if anyone wants to see it, it's down below in the description section. It's very popular. The first exercise in it is you write down all the things that are must-haves in a relationship. I've never met a traumatized person who was clear about this. And then you also write down the list of things that you absolutely cannot have in a relationship. And for me, one of them was, I cannot ever again be with somebody with a drug or alcohol problem. Now, that may sound like a no-brainer, except I kept finding myself in that situation. Even though I thought I was choosing better, I kept finding out that I hadn't, and I needed to write it down. Like, it's an extremely high priority for me. So they can have like levels of intensity. Like that one, absolutely not. Another absolutely not was they cannot be entangled with somebody else still, like an ex or, somebody, some friend that they have. Can't deal with that anymore. Too late. Can't do that in my life. And some of the must-haves were that they had to really love me. They had to accept parts of myself that I was aware that I had sort of crap fitted on before. Crap fit, that's our word here in Crappy Childhood Fairy, for when we fit ourselves to unacceptable situations or people. And so when I had done that, like they disapproved that I did my daily practice every day. They thought that was a nuisance and silly. I just was like, I can't be with anybody who disapproves of the thing that helps me. And so that's just a deal breaker for me. They had to love my kids and be totally safe and supportive of my kids, and follow my lead and how the kids were going to be raised, because I was their mom, and they have a dad. And my new husband, the only person I dated with these new standards, became my husband after 5 years of dating, and he is a terrific stepfather, and he was everything I could have hoped for. But here's the decision I made. I knew what it had to be if I was ever going to be with somebody again. And I knew that I had to never again date anybody who didn't fit that requirement. And a lot of those things up front. And a lot of those things you can find out over time. So I had to make a decision that I was going to let time pass. I wasn't going to get all entangled and attached to somebody without knowing that. He didn't meet my kids for a year. So that's like we needed some time to find out, like, is this the sort of person who should even meet my kids? And even then, my kids liked him when they understood him to be my friend. When they realized we were dating, it was hard for them. And so it was still more years. I mean, we didn't time it for them. We timed it slowly for ourselves so that we could really know reality together before actually getting married. And by then, the kids were very happy to have him there. So that's how it worked for me. And I just encourage you, like, follow in my footsteps. You can get that in the dating course. You can also find that on my website if you're interested. In the short run, I would love for you to focus on, like, what are the red flags that you saw? You're probably seeing them now, but I want you to really, really focus. What are the red flags that you saw, but you overrode? And what were you thinking when you overrode it? If you want a prompt about some common red flags that you got to watch for in dating, I've written them down. I've got this PDF. It's free. And I'll put it in the second link in the description section below. Anybody can download if they want to see it. Dating red flags. I've told people before, like, keep this with you in your pocket or your purse. If somebody does this, run. If somebody does this, run. And in your story, I heard a couple of things. If somebody does this, pause. And if somebody does this, run. And so you can check this out on the list if you like. I'm anxious to hear what everybody thinks in the comments here. Please be kind to our letter writers. They are great people. And they've done a very brave thing by sharing their dilemma here for the benefit of everybody to learn. So please be gentle with them when you comment. If you want to send me a letter, we have very clear guidelines on what kind of letter we accept and that I might answer on YouTube. I'd love to see your letter. You can find a link for how to send a letter to me down in the description section, further down. A lot of people don't know that the description section, you can see the top 2 lines under the video, but if you click more, it opens up. And almost everybody who creates videos has a whole bunch of cool stuff in there. Information, resources, links, caveats, disclaimers, guidance. So have a look. You can go see how to send me a letter there. And Lola, I wish you the very best with this period of healing. Good luck finding yourself again. No more abandoning yourself. Everything good lies ahead. If you like this video, I've got one that you're going to love right here, and I'll see you very soon. It's not supposed to feel like that. And if it feels like that now, it's not a good sign.